Once in a generation, transcendent student athlete, lifted Baylor to decades-high heights en route to earning 2011 Heisman Trophy. These are the first few sentences given in the bio for Robert Griffin III. RG3 was drafted by the Washington Redskins in 2012 behind Andrew Luck and ahead of the likes of Russell Wilson and Ryan Tannehill. Griffin should have been a mainstay in the NFL for a very long time, and to some extent that is still actually true. Today's video is about Robert Griffin III on his path to the NFL and how he transcended a college football program who had not seen success in a very long time and could be argued that they haven't seen as much success since. How did this guy, who was supposed to be the once in a generation type of talent, turn into the NFL draft bust that we know him as today? Well, today we will look at the entire career of Robert Griffin, as well as my own theories as to what went wrong towards the end. What it do, baby? It is Triple DS. Thank you guys so much for tuning in once again. I just really wanted to say this before the video really gets going. We have reached 1,000 subscribers. I made a video separate from this that just wanted to acknowledge and thank you guys for the support, how we've gotten to this point. And I just wanted to take another moment and thank you guys so much, because without y'all watching, without y'all subscribing, I wouldn't be here talking about football. So thank you guys so much for the continued support. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. We're now on the road to 2,000 subs. I know we just got to 1,000, but you know, you gotta keep thinking, you know, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. If you love football, if you love story time, if you love hearing about what happened with certain NFL players, this will be the channel for you moving forward. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and begin. Robert Griffin III was born on February 12, 1990 in Okinawa, Japan, to father Robert Jr. and Jackie Griffin. From the very get-go, his parents were very big on traditional values. You could argue that it helped him very early on in his life, as both of his parents were in the US military, specifically Army sergeants, which would cause them to move around consistently, hence why he was born in Japan in the first place. The Griffin household finally make a stop in Corpus Cove, Texas. From an athletic standpoint, the talent was obviously there very early on. Griffin was the perfect example of the student athlete. In just high school, he was one of the smartest kids with the highest GPAs, to go along with that fact that he was a track star, played football and played basketball. This guy kept himself very busy, but he never let it stop him from getting an education. In his junior year in high school, it became very apparent where his talents were going to take him, as in that season he throws for over 2,000 yards, 25 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, but 876 rush yards to go along with 8 rushing touchdowns. An absolutely marvelous year, but it's not to be outdone by his senior year. Although his passing went down, his rushing attack, his dual threat capabilities took off. Yes, he took a step back from the passing yards, only throwing for 1356, and he only threw 16 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So not the best from a passing perspective. But he rushed for 1,285 yards and ran for 24. Yes, I'm just double checking here. He ran for 24 rushing touchdowns. So in total, he had 40 touchdowns his senior year. I think that makes up for the higher interception rate, which was still only 7 interceptions. And on the track field, he was an incredible star, as he also ranked #1 in 110 and 400 meter hurdles, broke Texas records for both of them at 13.55 seconds and 35.33 seconds respectively. He catapulted to a 4-star recruit and originally committed to Texas because he wanted to play with head coach Art Briles. However, Coach Briles did receive an offer from Baylor and he was officially a Bear. RG3 did follow him, and although he initially committed to Texas, he really wanted to play with Coach Art, so he recommitted to Baylor University. I still really do want to emphasize how smart this guy was. He finished high school at 17 and he finished a semester early, meaning his grades were so caught up, so advanced, that he did not even need to finish high school with the rest of his peers. And unlike most freshmen, Griffin actually played most most games. Griffin did look the part, all things considered. He threw for 15 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, over 2,000 passing yards, and to top it off, he ran for 843 yards and another 13 touchdowns. To go along with a great year, he was awarded Big 12 Conference Freshman of the Year. And with all the success with football, he does not forget about track. Among Big 12 Conference, he still finishes in first place in the 400-meter hurdle. And you're still keeping up with your grades. In 2009, his quote-unquote sophomore year, Griffin is still doing more of the same. He's doing a lot of good things in the first couple of games. However, in week 3, before finishing that game out, on a 4th down play, RG3 does suffer an injury to his right knee. He does take time out to get taped up, and despite coaches and trainers suggesting against it, RG3 begs and insists he is fine. In halftime, they pull RG3 out. We're clearly winning. We're gonna win this game. Just come out. You're done for the day. RG3 agrees, the game's won, whatever, let's go to the locker room. It is later revealed that RG3 tears his right ACL and he continued to play. Yes, he's clearly hobbled and he kind of fell on his own power. Like, the lineman didn't really hit him, so he kind of his knee just kind of buckled when you really look at it. So the speculation was there that, this could have been pretty bad, but RG3's insistence that he's fine made you believe maybe it's not as serious as you think. But unfortunately, it would be the first of a plethora of injuries for Robert's football career. It goes without saying that he is out for the season. So despite starting 2-1, they finished 4-8. It also is worth mentioning that with this injury, unfortunately, his track career is all but finished as well. And I just want to take a moment because there is a narrative, and I'll talk more about this later. There is a narrative that RG3 is a soft player. First of all, everyone is soft if you're tearing your ACL. But this guy with a torn ligament in his knee played an entire half of football. And it's not like he's not getting hit. He's still taking hits here and there. There is a narrative there that he is a soft player. That is not soft in my opinion. Despite the huge setback on the field, off the field, RG3 still kept busy. He made the Dean's List in back-to-back years, all while rehabbing his knee. Because he was injured early on in the year, he was granted redshirt status, meaning he would still be part of the team and he would get a year of his eligibility back. In theory, he would replay his sophomore season next year. So let's go ahead and talk about 2010. We've already covered the fact that he made the Dean's List in this season, all while rehabbing his knee. But what did he do on the field? Well, he proved that he's more than just a running quarterback. There's a reason it's called dual threat. That means I can run and I can pass. In 2010, he throws for over 3,500 pass yards, which was the school record, and 22 pass touchdowns, which was also a school record, to just 8 interceptions. He runs for another 600 rushing yards and throws in another 8 rushing TDs. Wins Comeback Player of the Year award, earned Big 12 honors, and is Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. So not only is he Comeback Player of the Year, he is just the Player of the Year. And in his junior year, this is what catapults him. This is what makes him Andrew Luck's contemporary, because let's remember, at this point, Andrew Luck is the consensus #1, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. In his junior year, he throws for 4,293 passing yards, which broke his previous record by almost 1,000 yards, throws 37 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. Those 37 touchdowns, to this day, still a school record. Rushes for nearly another 700 yards and scores another 10 rushing touchdowns. He was the consensus All-American. He was the Manning Award winner. And he won the 2011 Heisman Trophy. On top of everything, he is also a bowl winner. In the Alamo Bowl, he does defeat the Washington Huskies. Clearly, the sky's the limit for this guy. Every year, despite a horrific injury setback, every year this guy had gotten better and better and better. At the end of his junior year, Robert Griffin decides that he will forego his senior year and enter the 2012 NFL Draft. Before we get there, this is something that I do with every video. Let's go ahead and talk about the team that drafted him the year prior. I guess let me just on this channel I have jokingly put, when I say Washington, I say Washington
redacted
or something like that whenever I say this. I will say Washington here and there, but I mean just at this point in time they were called the Redskins. So I'm just gonna refer to them as such. So in 2011, Washington is led by second-year head coach Mike Shanahan, and with quarterbacks John Beck and Sexy Rexy Grossman, who combined for 18 touchdowns and 24 interceptions. Washington finished 5-11, including going 2-10 in the final 12 games, finished 4th in the NFC East. And Washington has now missed the playoffs for the 4 consecutive years. As I've said, 2011 was obviously a season that helped RG3's stock tremendously, but scouts were split on how he would do in the NFL. Some criticisms that some people had were that he did not have the best field vision, and that he also panics when the pocket collapses or if he's under pressure. And another strange one, and this one did catch me off guard, but he also doesn't do well with people. That's a very, very broad criticism. Like, what do you mean he doesn't do well with people? Bob McGinn, a longtime sports writer of the Packers, he was extremely critical of Griffin, calling him Michael Vick, but not as good of a thrower. That he was in a simple system. If you look at his track record, no pun intended to his track record, he is willing to put in the time and effort to be the quarterback that you need him to be. There were already 2 teams that were interested. The Cleveland Browns with the 4th pick, and Washington, who at this point only had the 6th overall pick. Washington was convinced they had to get either Luck or they had to get RG3. The Colts at number 1 they weren't gonna trade down. However, the Rams were willing to trade down. They had their quarterback. They had Sam Bradford at this point. They knew teams would come a-knocking, and that they did. Washington did come a-knocking. They were convinced, Mike Shanahan was convinced, Dan Snyder was convinced, one of these 2 guys will be our future. So even before his pro day, Washington makes a tremendous trade, the likes that we hadn't seen really since Mike Ditka made the trade with Washington about Ricky Williams. The Redskins trade not only their 6th overall pick, but their 39th pick of that same year's draft to go along with their 2013 and 2014 first round picks. All of that to move up 4 slots. That's how convinced they were that the future is here with one of these 2 quarterbacks. At his pro day, on 50 pass attempts, only has 1 bad throw. It's easy to say that pro day went extremely well. Come draft day, Washington is committed to whoever the Colts don't draft, they will draft the 2nd quarterback available. And sure enough, luck goes to the Colts. Griffin does fall into the hands of Washington, where they pick him up, 2nd overall pick. Now, I wish I could say the rest is history, but we are just getting started. To go along with Griffin, 2 key standouts of this draft also include Alfred Morris in the 6th round and Kirk Cousins in the 4th. Shanahan at the very beginning was drooling over Robert Griffin III. He was comparing him to Steve Young and John Elway. And at the same time, Shanahan knows he's on very thin ice. Along with having back-to-back losing seasons, you swung and missed with an aging Donovan McNabb a few years prior. So this is your 2nd shot. In week 1 against the Saints, RG3 had his skills on full display. Throwing for 320 yards, passing for 2 touchdowns, and running for another 42 in a great win against the Saints, who were just a few years removed from a Super Bowl championship. After that great first game, there were small growing pains. They do go 2-6 in the following 8 games. It's a little murky, but it's understandable. You got a new quarterback, a new running back. Everything is just taking its time to mesh. It would prove that patience does pay off as Washington finishes the season with 7 straight wins. 5 of those wins coming against the NFC East themselves. And remember, at this point, the NFC East isn't the joke it is now. Some wins included were against Philadelphia in week 11, where RG3 had a perfect passer rating. I need this little Street Fighter guy to say it for me. Perfect. In week 14, they had defeated Baltimore, who were 9-3 at the time, and would eventually become the Super Bowl champions that year. But that's not to say that RG3 didn't have the injury bug already in his rookie year. In a game against the Falcons in week 5, he did suffer a mild concussion. Also, in that game against the Ravens in week 14, despite the win, he did sustain a grade 1 LCL sprain. So another ligament in that same right knee, that same repaired right knee. And although Griffin sat out the following game, he was back in action in weeks 16 and 17, clearly still not 100%. If you watch some of the tape from either game, you could tell that something's clearly off. So he's not the same QB he was. Washington finishes 10-6, winning the NFC East and clinching a playoff berth for the first time in 4 years. Okay, so we've already established RG3 was injured against the Ravens about a month ago at this point. So clearly, I mean, yes, they gave him that 1 week off. Week 16 and 17, he is obviously not the quarterback that we saw prior. It goes without saying, if you're playing injured, the likelihood of you re-injuring whatever it is much, much higher. In the first quarter, he tweaks the same right knee. After that initial tweak on the same knee that has been bothering him, you need to pull this guy out. After he exits, hobbling to the sideline, he comes back pretty quickly into the game and continues to play. Finally, the injury that changes everything. The center does give a bad snap. It leads to RG3 having to scramble for the football. It results in just an ugly collapse of his right leg. On that play, on that same field that has messed up the careers of the likes of Chase Young, Alex Smith, Joe Burrow, this same FedEx Field took someone's knee out a long time before that. RG3 tears his ACL, along with his ACL. Also, it is later reported that he has a torn meniscus. The Redskins, with no RG3, go on to lose 24-14, despite a great season where he won Rookie of the Year. It almost felt like a sucker punch to every Washington fan and to that team to end the season how it ended. In a later interview that following March with ESPN's Trey Wingo, RG3 does admit he probably should have stayed on the sidelines. I know where my responsibility is within the dilemma that led to me having surgery to repair my knee, and all parties involved know their responsibilities as well. Griffin does finish with 3,200 passing yards, 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, a 102 passer rating to go along with 815 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. Although the Redskins finished 20th in passing, they finished 4th in scoring and 1st in rushing. It goes without saying, there is plenty of fallout, there's plenty of scrutiny, criticism headed towards Mike Shanahan at this point. It was his decision to leave RG3 in this game. Shanahan claims Dr. James Andrews, and if you don't know who Dr. James Andrews is, he is considered the best orthopedic surgeon in all of America. Shanahan claims Dr. James Andrews, who was at the game at the time, cleared RG3 following his tweak in the first quarter against the Seahawks. Dr. Andrews does refute this claim, stating that he never cleared RG3 to go back into this game. Griffin didn't even let us look at him, Andrews said. He came off of the field, walked through the sidelines, circled back through the players, and took off back to the field. I'm the one that shut him down that day. He claims he did not even clear him to play at all. So how in the world would I have cleared him to come back from a tweak in the same knee? It's a lot of he said. Feel free for you guys to, come up with your own opinions. And not only the fans are beginning to sour on Mike Shanahan, owner Dan Snyder is not happy about this either. At the end of the day, Griffin was clearly struggling. Why does Shanahan continue playing him? My own personal speculation is that, he's a coach on the hot seat. He's also a coach who, if you can play hurt, you're not injured. RG3 on the flip side will always look for a reason to come back into the game. So when you combine those two things, it has the potential to have catastrophic results, and that's clearly what we saw here. The good news out of all this is that after surgery, it does seem like RG3 is going to be ready for the upcoming 2013 season. After no preseason, Robert Griffin III is suiting up. He is ready for week 1. Let's go ahead and do what we did last year, but better. It became apparent very quickly. RG3 was not the same player in his second year. They didn't start off the best, going 3-5, and it did not get better at all. They lost the next 8 games, finishing 3-13. One loss against the 49ers was bad enough. Reporters were questioning if his O-line didn't like RG3 after all these hits, hit after hit after hit. Now, both Trent Williams, who is the left tackle, the leader of that locker room, and RG3 both refute those claims, saying that they're silly, they're ridiculous. I'm paraphrasing with those. For the final 3 games of the season, Shanahan shuts RG3 down due to quote-unquote long-term health concerns. If you look at the stats for RG3, he regressed in almost every single category, throwing 16 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, just over 3,200 pass yards, 489 rush yards, and 0 rushing touchdowns. Now, there are many reasons and many theories, speculations as to what happened to this team. How did you guys go from 10-6 to 3-13? I just told you guys how everything happened in the 2013 season, but let me talk to you guys about what happened prior to that, the off season, before 3-13 even happened. Let's just start with the feud between head coach and owner. If you don't know who Dan Snyder is, to sum it up, he is regarded as the worst owner of not only the NFL, but all 4 American sports. The character of the person has come into question. The business decisions come into question. The allegations among this guy. The allegations of his franchise being named, well, Redskins. That's just a little context of who Dan Snyder was. He was a man-child billionaire. Final thing about Snyder, he does try to be very hands-on. Most successful owners are hands-off. RG3 and Dan Snyder actually got along very well, to the point where a true friendship blossomed between the two. Snyder wanted RG3 to play less zone read. This is RG3's strengths for the record. That means he wants RG3 to become more of a pocket passer. With the owner buddying up with the quarterback, the head coach is usually the odd one out, which led to a huge power struggle of where they wanted to go with this franchise. See, this is something that you only do when you know you have the backing of the owner. Griffin talked to Shanahan about his role, his own role, Griffin's role. But Shanahan had speculation that it wasn't really RG3 talking to him. This was Dan Snyder. And quote, it was actually 2 days after the Super Bowl, Shanahan said. He had asked to have a meeting, and I don't really blame that on Robert. He had a heck of a year, had a serious injury at the time, and it's me that changed the perception of a person. Because I know Dan Snyder felt very strongly about Robert being a drop back quarterback and did not want Robert to take shots. He is hearing it from Dan Snyder, and based off the words that Griffin is telling Shanahan, it feels like these two had their own private conversation. So that would make anyone who's trying to have control of this team as a head coach feel some type of way. Yeah, he did ask for a meeting. He did talk about, number one, why he wanted change. He mentioned the Baltimore game and the Atlanta game, his injuries. He talked about protection shortening his career. He actually mentioned what plays were acceptable and unacceptable. When he started talking about what plays were acceptable and unacceptable, and that he wasn't a rookie anymore, and he wanted to voice his opinion, the term unacceptable is used by owner Dan Snyder quite often. Shanahan is putting 2 and 2 together. My quarterback is buddying up with the owner. I'm starting to lose power here. So with all this in the background, all this tension between head coach versus owner, head coach versus quarterback, it's not a healthy environment in Washington. After a week 11 loss against the Eagles, to which point they dropped to 3-7, Griffin at this point is criticizing the play calling. Shanahan is critical of Griffin's play-making abilities. It wasn't until after the last game where Washington lost to the Chiefs 45-10 that a lot of this backstage tension, a lot of these backstage risks became public. Now that you know all the context, the benching of RG3 feels like a bit of a, I'm about to get fired anyway. So this is my final FU. Shanahan is fired. In comes Jay Gruden with his West Coast offense. West Coast offenses are built for pocket passes, which is why he was so successful with it in Cincinnati with Andy Dalton. Jay Gruden almost immediately realizes RG3 is not the prototype quarterback that he wants running his offense. Almost immediately, you have a second coach in as many years who doesn't really want to play with this quarterback. They haven't even played a down of meaningful games yet. Gruden was so convinced that RG3 would not work out that he'd rather look for a different quarterback as opposed to the golden boy than switch his playbook for this guy. But Dan Snyder wasn't having any of that. Much to Jay Gruden's resentment, he did listen to ownership and RG3 was the starting quarterback come week 1. However, very quickly in week 2, he dislocates his ankle, furthering his list of injuries thus far in his career. Kirk Cousins does step in at this point, and he plays very well in this system, throwing for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, leading Washington to a 41-10 win against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He does lose his next 4 starts and does ultimately get benched for Colt McCoy. When Griffin was healthy, reports were indicating that Gruden still didn't even want to start him. But again, Snyder is insistent you play him despite it not meshing with his playbook or his offense at all. You are going to play this guy. RG3 returns in week 9 but is playing very poorly. His stats over the next 3 games are just 2 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, just a little over 560 yards, so that's less than 200 yards a game, 76 rushing yards, and in 3 games is sacked 16 times. After weeks of struggle and losing, Jay Gruden has had enough. He is putting his foot down. RG3 is benched in favor of Colt McCoy. This is just a little razzle dazzle, of a stat, because I feel like not many people talk about it or know about it. But the Redskins play the Rams in week 14. RG3 at this point is benched, guys. Remember, he is benched at this point. You know, when the coin toss, you throw your team captains or your game captains out to the field for the coin toss. Do you know what the Rams did? Every single pick that they got from Washington, they were all there. That is adding salt to the wound and trolling like no other. That's savagery. I mean, I think it must have worked because they lost 24-0. So in week 15, McCoy does get injured and RG3 returns to actions, and he finishes out the season, all things considered, decent. You can't say the same for Washington as a whole, as they finished 4-12. His final stats for 2014, he had a 68% completion rate, 4 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, and is sacked a whopping 33 times. Did I tell you guys he's only started 7 games? Tensions continue building between RG3 and now another head coach. It has gotten to a point where everyone in the organization, including a lot of higher-ups, want to move on from Griffin. All except one person. But this is what I mean, like the stubbornness. It's like, it's time to move on. Give Griffin a fresh start. Give your team a fresh start. Now 2 coaches have said they don't want to play with this guy, and you're still forcing this marriage to continue. We fast forward to the 2015 season, and in a meaningless preseason game against the Lions, where RG3 is continuously getting hit, shot after shot. As a result, he suffers a concussion in a meaningless game. Concussion aside, Jay Gruden names Kirk Cousins as his week 1 starter and beyond. He's the best quarterback on our roster at this time. He's earned the right to be here for our starter for 2015. And to add more to it, RG3 was not only not the starter, he was also not even the backup. RG3 did not play a single meaningful snap in 2015. And Cousins in Jay Gruden's system does actually play pretty well, resulting in Washington going 9-7 and actually making the playoffs. The theory as to why RG3 wasn't even the backup was really for financial reasons. Basically, Washington did not want to pay RG3 his salary. I don't know how it works, but long story short, had RG3 played, then gotten hurt at some point in the season, he would have been due his entire $6 million salary that year. Even if you say financial reasons, this is brutal. That is brutal. After the 2015 season, RG3 is finally let go. An ugly end to what was a promising start. His final stats with the Washington Redskins throughout all these years was a near 64 completion percentage, 8,097 yards, 40 touchdowns to 23 interceptions, 1,480 rushing yards, and 8 rushing touchdowns. No one could have ever imagined that from the injury in the playoffs against Seattle would lead to not playing a healthy RG3 at all in 2015 to save $6 million. Now that RG3 is a free man, he is free to sign, he's free to start over, he's free to do whatever he needs to do to get his career back on track. He signs with the Cleveland Browns and is almost immediately named the starting quarterback. But just remember, y'all, this is the Hugh Jackson era of the Cleveland Browns. It doesn't really make much of a difference necessarily because in week 1, RG3 suffers a fractured shoulder and is placed on IR. Now, who knows how much of a difference RG3 would have made? I'd like to argue that he would have got a couple wins, but the Browns go 0-12 in his absence. He returns in week 13, and after losing against the Bengals and the Bills, Griffin does lead the Browns to their first and only win of the 2016 campaign, as the Browns are 1-15 by year's end. So another injury-riddled season. The final stats in his time in Cleveland have him at 886 passing yards, 2 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, just 190 rush yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Griffin is released from the Cleveland Browns despite getting them their only win. So again, it's hard to blame Griffin. He got hurt for more than half the season, and these were the same Browns that would go 0-16 the following year. RG3 goes unsigned for the 2017 season. In 2018, signs with the Baltimore Ravens to back up Flacco, then Jackson, which included 2 starts. And he remains a backup up until the 2020 season. Prior to the 2019 season, he had fractured his thumb, so he was out for a little while. And in 2020, in his lone start of the season, RG3 injures his hamstring and is placed on IR. Now, he has signed with ESPN as a college and NFL analyst, and based off of what I've watched on ESPN, he is actually very, very insightful. This goes back to how he is one of the smartest people out there. Like, he was on Dean's List and all that. He was getting his master's in communication. I'm sure that played a factor. He does seem comfortable where he's at this particular part of his life. And his contract with ESPN allows him to sign with an NFL team should the opportunity arise. As of this recording, which is August 30th, 2022, RG3's stats for his career stand at 63% completion percentage, 9,271 passing yards, 43 touchdowns to 30 interceptions with a passer rating of 86.5, 1,809 rushing yards to go along with 10 rushing touchdowns. All in all, you do ask yourself, is there a specific point where it all went wrong? And most people will point to the injury. And to fair points, it makes sense. I mean, a lot of RG3 setbacks, even going back to college, had to do with injuries, specifically on his right knee. It didn't help buddying up with Dan Snyder because it would resulted in a poor relationship with Mike Shanahan, in which I do want to actually question. If he's insistent on RG3 playing, why isn't there a coach hired with the specific goal of having RG3 play that system? Why was Jay Gruden hired? My theory is that he was a successful offensive coordinator with the Bengals, so he was a hot commodity. He was proven with his track record being the brother of John Gruden. I could run in the family that you could be a successful coach, and because his style did mesh with what Snyder wanted RG3 to become. What he didn't take into account was that Jay Gruden was unwilling to work with RG3. So as a result of 2 coaches not necessarily wanting to work with him on this craft, he never developed into this pocket passer that Dan wanted him to be. Even when he wasn't injured, he was just genuinely getting outplayed by Kirk Cousins. All in all, it started with injuries. Subsequently, it ended with injuries too. The worry from Snyder came from the fact that RG3 got hurt. Had Shanahan maybe not played him, had RG3 not been so insistent on playing. And with the insistent on playing, I really don't hold that on RG3 that much. It's up to the guys who've been here for a while to tell him, you can't play. You should not be in this game. Shanahan insists that he was given the all clear, but you've got to understand, man, you've been a coach for 3 decades. You know something is not right with your quarterback. You got to make that decision. Yeah, he is insistent on playing, but you as the coach have to put your foot down. Like, you're not playing. That's my take on where it really went down, because RG3 will always, I mean, it's in his nature. You keep going. And it sucks that it didn't work out, because we saw in his rookie season what he was capable of, and I truly believe he was capable of more. At this point, my belief is that he is done with football despite the clause with ESPN. But to look on the bright side, I touched on this earlier, but I'm also getting tired of the RG3 soft persona. This guy, despite injury after injury, everything that has come his way, in my opinion, he overcame. He tore his ACL at 18, 19 years old. Came back stronger than ever. RG3 came back from what was another tornado. Like, do you understand the toll that probably takes on someone to tear a ligament of that nature on 2 separate occasions? And RG3 overcame it and was confident and was ready from a mental standpoint. He did not let it take control of his destiny. To this point, he got released because he got injured again. And he still has a clause in his contract as an analyst that if the opportunity comes back, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to play, I'm ready to be signed at any given moment. This guy still hasn't given up, and that is truly something to commend. Injury prone, I'll give you, yes, but he has been called soft by a lot of people. And how do you call someone soft with everything they've gone through on the football field, with everything that he's gone through in Washington, which was as toxic of an environment as you can get? He always goes back to his values as to why he keeps going, whether if it's God, if it's his family values. And touching on family, I mean, family was always a big part of his motivation, why he was convinced to keep going. In that 49ers game in 2013 that I mentioned, where they were questioning the offensive line's relationship with Griffin, his own father came into the locker room to check up on his son. Some people saw it as, an invasion of privacy. It's just a dad genuinely concerned for his son. When he was confronted about it with reporters, RG3 was quick to be like, back off my dad, he's checking on his son. So blood runs thick in the Griffin household, and I do feel like that helped him in all aspects of his career, whether it was setbacks, whether it was when he was flourishing. That is gonna do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I personally enjoyed covering this story because I grew up in the Washington DC metro area, the DMV, and when RG3 was drafted, I was in high school, so everyone around me was hyped. All these Subway commercials, he was on posters everywhere around. He was a big deal. So for me to cover him, it was truly fun, and I really hope you guys learned something too. And if you guys did, and if you're still here, thank you guys so much for watching. If this is your first time on the channel, feel free to smash that like button, subscribe, turn those notifications on. We try to have a What Happened To video at the very minimum once a month with a little bit of other NFL material. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys again for 1,000 subscribers. It truly means a lot. And until next time, boy! He's keeping, I mean, for me, it was, should the necessity but both have but in his but it